All right, hello again, and welcome to day 3 of week 31 of the Religious Education Initiative. Last time we began to read the account of what happened leading up to the Last Supper, and we saw Jesus institute the celebration of the Eucharist of Holy Communion and begin to speak to the apostles about how they were called not to rule over one another, but to serve in imitation of Him. In this next reading, which concludes chapter 22, we will see him continue to speak with them, and then they will go out to the Mount of Olives, where he will be betrayed and arrested by the soldiers of the high priest. So, he begins by talking to Peter, to Simon Peter. He says, "Simon, Simon, listen. Satan has demanded to sift all of you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail. And you, when once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers." And Peter said to him, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death." Jesus said, "I tell you, Peter, the cock will not crow this day until you have denied 3 times that you know me." He said to them, "When I sent you out without a purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything?" And they said, "No, not a thing." He said to them, "But now the one who has a purse must take it, and likewise a bag. And the one who has no sword must sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you, this scripture must be fulfilled in me. And he was counted among the lawless." That's the scripture. "And indeed, what is written about me is being fulfilled." They said, "Lord, look, here are 2 swords." He replied, "It is enough." He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial." While he was still speaking, suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man?" When those who were around him saw what was coming, they asked, "Lord, should we strike with the sword?" Then one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this," and he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple police, and the elders who had come for him, "Have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness." Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." A little later, someone else, on seeing him, said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then, about an hour later, still another kept insisting, "Surely this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." At that moment, while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Now the men who were holding Jesus began to mock him and beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" They kept heaping many other insults on him. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people, both chief both chief priests and scribes gathered together, and they brought him to their council. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." He replied, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I question you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." All of them asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" He said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." There are a million things that we could say about this, but I think it's good that we look at the disciples, and at Peter especially, because it's easy to blame Peter and say, well, Peter thought he was willing to die with Jesus, but in the end he really wasn't. But we can give Peter some more credit and I think turn the lens a little bit more on ourselves. Peter had, I think, certainly worked himself up where he was ready to fight. He was ready to go to war. He was ready to fall in battle, defending Jesus and fighting for whatever he thought they should be fighting for. What Peter wasn't prepared for was for Jesus to refuse to fight. He wasn't prepared for Jesus to just go with them. I think it took all of the wind out of his sails. And this is the temptation. All of the disciples underwent this temptation. Jesus had been telling them what he came to do, what kind of salvation he was bringing. He had shown them again and again that although he had power like none of them had ever seen, he wasn't going to use it for violence. He wasn't going to use it to require and force submission. But they really struggled to see. They could not understand. And this is, I think, why Peter denies him. He's perfectly willing to die in glorious battle, even if it's futile. He doesn't think it's going to be futile. That's the problem. This looks futile. Jesus gave himself up. Peter isn't ready to offer himself as a sacrifice, as a lamb led to slaughter. And he sees Jesus going in this way. So it's not just that Peter is scared. It's not just that he's a wimp. It's that he is not ready to be crucified without fighting back. This is the point where, really, all of us are tempted to deny Christ. It's easy for us to say that we'll follow him when the church is open and everything is beautiful and we're singing triumphant hymns. It's easy for us to say that we'll follow him when the world is full of Christian people and everyone honors us for the wisdom and the morality and the history and the beauty that Christianity has brought into the world. It's really, really hard to follow Jesus when we're suffering and it doesn't seem fair. It's really hard to follow Jesus when we're suffering injustice and it hurts. It's really hard to be faithful when it requires that we take up the cross and be crucified unjustly and without fighting back. So let's give Peter some credit. I think he was struggling not just with fear, he was struggling with Christ's call to be faithful to him. And what's important is that he repents. He does come back. He denies Christ in this moment. But after Christ is dead, we see Peter come back again. We see him choose to be counted with the followers of Jesus, even after it seems that everything is hopeless. And that is when he sees the resurrection. This is how it is for all of us. We will not see or taste the glory of God until we learn to die with him. And we cannot count ourselves as truly faithful unless and until we accept the suffering that comes to us in life. This probably isn't, this isn't a lesson that we want to teach our children. We really, really struggle to avoid telling our children that this is what it means to be a Christian. And part of it is it's almost impossible to say this in words. We need to learn to show them in our actions by loving those who hate us, by enduring, but we need to learn to teach this with our words as well. That to be a Christian isn't all about joy and glory and everything being perfect. Being a Christian is about learning to die with Christ so that we may be raised with him. So, for us, we're halfway through the fast. This is the Sunday of the cross when I'm recording this. We're preparing, when you listen to this, day 3, it'll still be the week of the cross, but that'll be a few days afterward, a few days behind now. But it is a good thing to reflect on. What does it mean that we venerate the cross? What does it mean that we glorify the Lord's resurrection? And what does that mean to us in how we live? May God give us strength and faithfulness to follow him. God bless you all. I'll see you next week for week 32.